Awesome. Hello, everybody. I'm sorry about a minute late today. I had a last minute little hiccup connecting my computer. So, massive welcome. I'm really excited to be running this abstract tutorial today. I think the beach is one of my favorite places to be, and so I'm really looking forward to be able to share how to paint it in such a free and very expressive way. So before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that this class is being held on the traditional lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to the elders both past, present and future. So in today's tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how to build a lovely abstract ocean painting, exactly like the one behind me. And I'm going to be going through just a bit of a technical, explaining the technical side of how to use palette knives, moulding compounds or moulding pastes, as well as your Atelier interactives as well. So to get started, I'll just show you what materials we're using today. So over here on my table, you can see I have some lovely palette knives. So let's get started. We've got the canvas, so it's my lovely canvas here. The palette knives that I'm using today, I'm using a very large teardrop palette knife, and the teardrop palette knives, they look like teardrops, that's why they're sort of called that. And I have two sizes, a very, very large one, which is good for blocking in sort of big areas, or if you're wanting to create like nice flat textures. Then you'll also have this lovely little small one, which is good for all the little fiddly bits, Now this one here is a bit of an unusual shaped one. It's definitely not your standard shape as far as palette knives are concerned, but it is quite useful, and I'll be using this as well today. With palette knives, they sort of have two main shapes, either the teardrop or an angled one, but many of the shapes of the palette knives are actually referred to numbers, and where it gets a little bit confusing is each different brand of palette knife will have a different labeling of numbers. So I guess you just have to look for the shape of the face of the palette knife and think about the kinds of marks that you're wanting to make, and ensure that it matches up. Now, as far as the colours I'm using today go, so I'm using the lovely Atelier interactive acrylics. They're a lovely buttery consistency, very well pigmented, and a professional artist grade paint. They're just absolutely delightful. So we have today Prussian blue, which is a delightful, dark, cool blue. An ultramarine blue, which is a fantastic, really rich, royal, almost like a primary blue, like your real base blue. If there's one blue you're going to get, I'd say make sure it's your ultramarine. The next colour I think has to be one of my favourite colours, Cobalt Turquoise Light. It is just absolutely delicious. As far as colours go, this one, oh, it's so nice. Then we have our brilliant violet, not violet, oh my gosh. This is just a lovely bright purple. Purples can be a tricky colour to mix, so it's nice to have sort of a pure pigment purple. It gives you nice bright colours without too much hassle. Then we have our Napthol Crimson here. Napthol Crimson is a nice, rich, slightly cool red. And Naples Yellow. Naples Yellow is a very soft, quite warm, but not ultra warm yellow. This is a fantastic colour if you do paint a lot of portraits, or I guess a lot of oceans, or a lot of beaches, I should say. So you have, that lovely kind of quite soft yellow. And now we can't go past probably the most important paint to have. I think everybody needs one of these, is the titanium white. Titanium white is a very strongly pigmented white, and it's very opaque. So there are a few different whites out there, but the titanium's the best. Alrighty, the last thing that we're using today is moulding paste. Moulding paste is so much fun to use. You feel like you're not only a painter, but you're also a sculptor at the same time. So there are a few different types of sort of pastes and gels you can add into your acrylic to increase the texture of your work. Moulding paste is the most textured additive that us at Chroma actually create. So this medium, it is responsible for creating incredibly strong forms. You can build it up quite a lot actually. So it's very strong, can create large amount of textures, high amounts of relief, and it's quite robust. Now, one thing to mention as well before we get started is it is important if you're using thick textured medium and thick paint to ensure that your surface is quite strong. So a stretched canvas or wood panel would be ideal for this. You don't want to have any loose canvas, and you absolutely do not want to paint on paper when you're using thick applications of paint. The reason for that is that if your surface is a little bit bendy, it's a bit more flimsy, and the weight of the paint on your surface will actually cause it to distort, and anyway, it's a whole headache. Just don't worry about it. Always make sure to get a stretched canvas when you're doing this. Alrighty, so with that said and done, we are ready to roll. Now, one thing that I will mention as well today, before I get too on the roll with everything, is that with this session, you're welcome to paint along with me, or you can just watch and ask questions. So there is a chat function with the Facebook Lives. I would absolutely recommend hop in there, and at any point if you have any question about anything that I'm using or what I'm doing, please hop in there and just let me know, and we'll answer up any questions that you might have. Now, the other thing I'll mention too is that if you're wanting to, let's say that you want the whole sort of tutorial today, or you'd like to watch the tutorial again in your own time, you can hop on to sort of our website, chroma.com. You can subscribe to our newsletter, and we can actually send you through a list of instructions as well as the recording of today's class too. If you hop into the description of the class, you should be able to find the link too, and it will be shared in our chat as well. So you can subscribe to our newsletter to get the whole session, because in an hour there's a lot to go through, and yeah, it's nice to be able to pause it and go through in your own time as well. So anyway, with that said and done, now we can start thinking about our painting. So the first two colours I'm going to be using today is the Ultramarine blue and the Titanium white. Now I'm going to use quite a lot of white because this scene, it's very soft. It's almost sort of a bit pastel-y. So lots and lots of white. Okay, so I'm going to start off. I'm using a flat palette today. It is important to use a flat surface when you are using palette knives. So if you don't have a flat palette handy, you can actually get a piece of baking paper and clip it to a piece of cardboard. It's a really easy way of making a very, very cheap disposable flat palette. Anyway, I've got lots of painting hacks as well. Okay, so I'm going to place out a large amount of the titanium white. Oh, there we go. Look at that. And already you can just see the quality of this colour in how sort of thick that is, how well it already holds its form. But one thing I will mention about the acrylics is that as the acrylic dries, all the water sort of evaporates. So it's almost like it hardens and sets, right? And I'm just going to place out a very small amount of the ultramarine there. So as it sets, a lot of the moisture sort of evaporates out of it, and it does sort of flatten. And that's always the case with acrylic. So what you'll find is that if you're painting and you're using a lot of texture, you'll come back to when it's dry, and all of a sudden your picture will be flat. That's actually why we add in the moulding compound, because the moulding compound adds in sort of bits and pieces that actually help give that paint structure when it dries, which is very important. Okay, so you can see the quantities of each colour that I've placed out. Very, very small amount of the ultramarine blue and a very large amount of the white there. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to start with my really big palette knife. So that's this one here. Ooh, I love this palette knife, it's so fun. I almost feel like I'm a tradesperson, blocking in really big pieces of colour. So let's mix those two together. Now, when you're mixing with a palette knife, you always want to use the back face of the palette knife. So you'll notice there's a little bit of a bend in the neck here. That prevents your fingers from getting into your colour, but that shows that that's the back face. So you sort of will pull it from one side, pull your paint from one side, sort of squeech down. I don't think that's a word. Squelch, squish, squish, squishing it down. But it's a dragging from one side, then a squishing, then dragging from one side and squishing. When you first use palette knives, they feel a bit cumbersome. Cumbersome? My words today aren't working particularly well. So you can see how this is creating a very, very lovely, very light, sort of beautiful pastel blue, real baby blue, isn't it? And that's, you know, quite perfect for, we're going to use this colour for our abstract sky. Now the thing about our lovely artwork today, you can definitely tell it's an ocean, but it is abstracted in that, you know, the texture, the lines, the forms are all quite heavily stylized, but the colours, funnily enough, are not abstracted very much. I'm still using quite realistic colours. When you are using a palette knives and placing on colour quite thickly, it's important to mix large quantities of each colour. The trick with your palette knife is lots of paint and a light pressure of your hand, but I'll be going through that a little bit more in just a bit. Okie dokie, so now that we have our mix ready to go, let's add in some of our moulding compound. Now, moulding compound can be added into your acrylic at any ratio, and it will still dry perfectly. It will, it's going to work. You're not going to, you know, have any issues with like cracking or anything like that. Now, the lovely thing about having control of how much moulding compound you add means that you can control just how much texture you want in your paint. So this is important if you're, you know, creating an artwork and you're working in the background and you think, oh, I only want just a slight amount of texture in the background, but I want a lot of texture in the foreground where the subject is to really help it pop, right? So as you're mixing in the moulding compound, you think, okay, well, this is the background color, so I'm just going to put maybe 1 part moulding compound, 2 parts acrylic paint. So there's twice as much paint than the compound of the paste. I keep calling it compound. It was, as you can see just here, previously moulding compound, so you have to ignore whenever I say compound, I am meaning the paste. Oh dear me. Anyways, so yes, so with a small amount of the paste into the acrylic means that there's slightly less texture, and it means when you go into the area of your artwork that you want a lot of texture, you know, you can put 2 parts moulding paste, 1 part acrylic paint, so you have twice as much of the paste than the acrylic. Okay, so what I'm going to be doing to scoop it out, I'm not going to be using the same palette knife as I've been mixing paint, obviously, because I'm going to get colour all through my, you know, my lovely jar. So there we go, using a new palette knife, and as I'm scooping that up too, I'm still using the back face. The back face of your palette knife gives you the most control with your work. So nice big scoop. And I'm just going to place this so you can see how much moulding compound I have in comparison to my paint. I'd say I've got a little bit more moulding compound than my acrylic, which is, it's good because it means that this is going to be super textured, right? So let's just squish that down. There we go. And now another thing that's quite useful to keep on hand is a rag, so you can wipe your palette knives. There's no need to wash them in water. You don't really need a jar of water for this, but you do need a rag. So think, oh, maybe you've got some old t-shirts that you can tear up. Or if you don't have any rags handy, or things that need to be turned into rags that you've been holding on to for too long, you can use some paper towel as well. So you never really rinse them in water. Because they are metal, it can lead to rusting. They're usually made out of stainless steel, but even in that case, you don't want to get into the habit of leaving them in a jar of water. It's just not very good for both the metal of the face, but also the glues of the handle as well. So that's why it's good always to just pinch and wipe them. Okay, so I've got my moulding paste. Now I'm being good. I'm calling it paste like I should be. Now I can squish and mix those two together. Oh, this is so fun. It's like, I think half of the fun with using palette knives and moulding compound is actually just mixing the paint together. I know that might sound like really childlike of me, but it's really fun. You feel like, you know, you're playing. There we go. You can just see how seamlessly that moulding compound has actually blended in with my acrylic. So if I push that around, you can see there's no lumps or bumps. It's smooth. It's really, really consistent. And that's one thing that you need to be conscientious of when you're using heavy-bodied mediums is that if you're using like cheaper, lower quality ones, you know, they don't blend into your paint very well. They distort the color of your acrylic as well. So you'll notice with this, like, that color hasn't really changed very much at all. Now, looking into the medium here, you can see it does have a slightly white color to it. It's very, very subtle, but it blends in with the colors quite well. Now, one thing that I will mention as well, if you're using very dark colors, the Moulding compound can ever so slightly lighten your color. It is so subtle. It's actually one of the things that I've noticed with using a lot of moulding paste of a whole bunch of different brands. I find that the cheaper ones, especially ones you get from the $2 shop, those, you add them into your color and they change it. They will lighten it about 3 or 4 shades, which is quite, you know, frustrating when you're painting and you're thinking, oh, I'm going to mix this, but then I have to compensate for the medium with that distorts the color and all this other stuff. So you know that it's a good quality paste when the color stays quite true. So there you go, test of quality here. All right, so you mix it through quite thoroughly for probably about, I don't know, maybe 30 seconds. But in saying that, because this medium is such a high grade, it's pretty amazing. It's like you only need to sort of push it around once or twice and it's already blended together, which is really cool. All right, wonderful. So I've got my big amount of compound. So let's throw this on our canvas. Maybe we'll just wipe it on our canvas. So as we place it on, when we're scooping up our paint, we want to make sure that the whole back face of our palette knife is covered in paint. So the whole thing, already actually there's quite a lot of paint on there, but we're going to put even more. So here I'm going to be scooping it up with the side edge of my palette knife, engaging with my palette, so you can see that there. And I'm just literally going to drag that across. Wow, look at that, that's all my paint on one scoop. So now you get to see just how much you place on. Okay, now for this, we are just going to pretty much, well, I'm going to be dragging my palette knife across my surface, keeping the face of my palette knife parallel to the surface of my canvas. And also, can I just say, look at that. That is not going anywhere. How good. That shows how strong the medium is. If it wasn't a very strong medium, now I could be very comfortable with this. I could really just start to whack that a few times and it's stuck, right? That shows the strength of the compound. It shows the strength of the paste. Sort of weaker pastes and compounds, weaker materials, lower grade moulding paste or whatnot, they don't do this. They will literally start to fall off the palette knife. So the fact that it has this level of hold shows it's very good quality. So I'm just saying this because you can probably tell my passion with this stuff. I think it's just great. Oh, so great. I just whacked the camera. All right, so I'm starting off across the top, and I'm just going to sort of spread this across like I'm spreading butter on a piece of bread, okay? Wow, look at that. And I'm going to go back in the other direction. I'm using quite a heavy pressure with this. And the thing is about when you're spreading medium around, spreading paint around, the heavier the pressure is, the flatter the relief is going to be, and the more that particular color will sort of spread around your artwork. So place that on. So this particular area, it's going to be the sky. So having it quite flat is a good thing, because compositionally I want a lot. I'm just sort of helping that, by the way, just helping that, pushing that around the sides. Compositionally, I want the ocean and the sand and the things more in the foreground to really pop. Now, I can't just say, look how smooth that surface is. There's some very, very subtle little textures, which are lovely. I love the little subtleties of when you place it on with quite a flat palette, but it's quite, it's quite soft, which is good. So anyway. There we are. And I have completely used up that gigantic pile of paint that I had, which is pretty amazing. Okay, wait, I've got a little bit more to go. So maybe I'll just put that on the side and then sort of push that around too. All right, wonderful. There is a sky there. You can continue to sort of move back and forward across your section until you get a particular, pattern that you like. Because it's like with every single mark, there is a, it shows, there's like a trail of it. So anyway, that's our sky. It's just lovely. We've got our nice big mark. So the next thing we're going to do on our lovely sky is we're going to lay on some white mixed in with our moulding compound with a smaller palette knife. We're going to give the impression of maybe some little clouds. But with this, I think the trick is to keep it quite loose. All of your marks are going to be quite stylized and abstracted. So it doesn't need to be a really, you don't want to have really, really crisp, clean sort of clouds. They're going to be like blendy textured marks. So once you finish with the colour, keep your rag and pinch your palette knife. Pinch it and then drag it through. Ta-da! And then it's clean and ready to roll. Getting into the habit of cleaning your palette knife in between each stage of your painting, make sure that you keep your palette knife clean and you don't get a build-up of colour on there. All right, so let's talk about our cloud colours. In a second, I won't be able to leave this on here, so alrighty. So we're just going to keep it simple. We're just going to use titanium white, plain titanium white with moulding compound. And I'm going to be mixing it in about equal parts, roughly equal parts. So again, if you have any questions at all, feel free to put them up in the chat. Okay, so I've got my white and my textured medium ready to roll over here. So now I will just squish those together. And you might say as well, ooh, that's a bit game, mixing that right over the top of your blue. It is game, but a bit of a brave painter. There's not much blue there, so even if a little tiny bit gets into my colour, I'm not really that fussed. So you can see the way that I'm mixing it. I'm sort of going from one side, squishing it down, going from the other side, squishing it down. Again, you can just see how, look at that point on my palette. How crazy. So, like, honestly, this stuff, like I said, really takes you into the world of sculpture. And you know what the crazy thing is? If you were going to be making a mark like this on your canvas, it would stay like that. Now, one thing I will mention as well, if you were going to be building building your compound to literally, build a little sculpture out of it, like I've just done on my palette. Look at that, amazing. It's best to let your painting dry horizontally, because even though this is incredibly strong, beautiful, high quality compound, if you had a mark like this, for example, and your painting was up on your canvas like that, over time, like over a few hours as your paint dries, the gravity will be pulling down, working against it from a long period of time. So it is good, I think, if you are going to be making quite significant structures out of your paint, to allow your paint to dry horizontally. It's just a precautionary measure. Okay, so wonderful. We have our lovely titanium white mixed in with our compound. So now I'm going to, I realized something very silly as well. As I have been talking and painting, I've realized I'm using my my moulding compound palette knife for my mixing. So I'm going to swap palette knife. I'm going to use my small palette knife for this. So I'm going to just wipe that clean. Banish this one and make it sit over on top of my moulding paste so I don't make the same mistake again. I actually want to use my round one. So I'm going to be swapping over into my round palette knife here, and this is going to be my lovely cloud palette knife. So with this one, I'm going to be picking up the paint so it covers the whole back face of my, there we go, my whole back face of my palette knife. Also, check out the little structure I just made in my paint. Isn't that cool? See, like, as you're experimenting, it's so crazy. You see like little structures and details that, start to emerge in your medium. I mean, that could look really cool if you're painting like a bouquet of abstracted flowers or something like that. Anyway, you get ideas when you paint, lots of ideas. Okay, so I am covering pretty much my whole back face, there we go, of my palette knife with my compound. Now, The first technique that we did with that palette knife, we're holding it with a heavy pressure parallel to the canvas and wiping it across. With this one, we're going to hold our palette knife, not in like, I like to call this like a wand grip, right? An underhand. I call it the magic wand grip because you feel like you've got a wand and you're about to cast a spell or something. But what we're going to be doing is we're going to be holding it overhand. So you sort of pinch it across the top like this. By pinching it overhand like this, it gives you a little bit more control when you're wanting to create some nice parallel details, right? So you have to get quite creative and feel free to experiment with different ways that you hold your palette knife because that can affect the kinds of marks that you have. So far you have hold, you have pressure. Two main variables when using the palette knife. Two really good things to experiment with too. Now, the next thing we're going to be doing with the palette knife is we're going to be rolling it a little bit in your hand, in my fingers. So holding it overhand and I'm rolling it like this, okay? And rolling it gives you some really lovely curved marks and effects. So you think of those beautiful fluffy clouds, that's what we're going to be sort of envisioning as we abstract and create this sort of lovely work. So I'm going to put probably one kind of around here and one over here. And when I'm placing on these marks, because it's quite abstract and quite loose, I'm going to be conscientious of, if there's any tension in my shoulders or my arms. So I'm just going to roll my shoulders back. Imagine that all the marks that I'm making is actually sort of coming from my shoulder. So it's good that you can see straight on as well. So see how my arm is just sort of flowing around. It's like there's no rigidity there. It's just like this fluid movement. So when you are making abstract work, very expressive marks, you do want to have that real sort of fluidity about the way that you sort of build up your work. Anyways, all right, let's start putting some marks on our canvas. So I'm going to be starting over here and I'm just going to see how I'm rolling that around. Look at that mark that's come out, right? It's really interesting. It's starting to blend a little bit with what's there and it's created this lovely effect. So I'm just going to reapply my paint and I might put another roly-poly cloud over here. I almost feel like we should be listening to like Adele's like Rolling in the Deep or something while we do this. So I'm going quite free and I'm really kind of breaking out and sort of building up. I don't know, I'm really expanding. Now, one of the things to think about when you are making abstracted work too is don't have too much of a clear idea of what you want your painting to look like at the end. Because if you go in, it's so outcome based and you think, oh, this painting, I need it to be exactly the same as this. And if it's even a fraction, off, yeah, I'm a failure, So you set a very high expectation for yourself when you have a clear idea of, when you hold on to that expectation of, wanting to look a certain way. And what that does is that as you're creating, it actually stifles that sense of play because you should have a bit of a guide, a bit of a sort of a loose idea of where you're going with your painting, maybe your colors, maybe your loose composition, but you should always give yourself a very, very long leash as far as, little expressions of, little playful bits and pieces. So where I'm going with this, see my cloud grows over here. That's all right, I'm not mad about it. Might place another little one over here and okay, it's now a cloudy sky and that's all right. Now, one thing with this too is if you wanted, really crisp white clouds, what you just have to do is use a lighter pressure, lots of paint, and just sort of such a light pressure that only the paint is engaged with your canvas, not your palette knife. And that, I'll just show you there. Wonderful. Is how you can create some lovely, more crisp kinds of marks. So here I'm also starting to create a bit of a variation in textures as well. So you can see this part here, as I'm laying on layer and layer of the thick medium, it's starting to build those parts. And it's all wet on wet. So you can work alla prima, which is just all in one go kind of a work. But the trick is with that is you start with a thinner paint and you build up your textures. And with each consecutive layer of texture, you use a lighter pressure and a little bit more paint. So your 2 L's, light pressure, lots of paint. That's my golden rule of palette knife painting. So you can choose, and it helps you amplify these little parts. So say in those edges of those clouds, I really want to amplify them. Compositionally, I want them to pop a little bit more. I can sort of play in here, maybe put in some over there. And now I can't fiddle too much because my own art practice, I'm a very realistic painter. I do a lot of abstracts too, but I do like photorealistic work a lot of the time. So if I fiddle too much, it's just going to get more and more realistic. And because we're abstracting today, I need to learn where to stop. And that's when I'm going to stop. Any more work on those clouds are going to look too cloud-like for my liking. Anyway, I guess it's a difficult problem to have, isn't it? All right, now with the leftover white, it's okay to have a bit of leftovers there. We're going to use it later on. Now the next color we're using, it's one of my, I know that I said that the Cobalt Turquoise was my favorite. I have a lot of favorites when it comes to colors. Prussian blue is my recent love. I've discovered this color and its uses recently, like in the last 6 months. I always knew of it, but I really started applying it in my work. Anyway, so we'll put a little bit of Prussian blue. So nice. I am so glad this particular painting really handpicked some of my favorite colors with this, which just makes it awesome. All right, and we're actually not going to be changing the Prussian blue at all. We're just going to be mixing it in with our moulding compound. Here I am calling it compound again. I'm so sorry. Old habits die hard. Moulding paste. So I'm going to scoop up the moulding paste. Quite a lot of it. I actually am going to put more moulding paste, probably about twice as much moulding paste to my Prussian blue. So what this is going to do is just going to show you what your colour looks like when you're diluting it really heavily with your paint. So let me just place that down and not use this one because this is my moulding paste palette knife. So I'll banish that over there, not use that again. Okay. And what we'll do, we use the big palette knife again. It looks like overkill because it's a smaller amount of paint to this. But anyways, so look at, so nice. Okay, I've got to stop talking about this paint as I'm mixing it together. So you can see here in a very large quantity, mixing with a very dark colour, does slightly lighten your paint. Now, this is amplified because of the huge quantity. In saying that, when I put that amount down, it actually looked more like, I'd say 3 or 4 parts moulding compound, 1 part acrylic. Isn't that colour yummy? Look at that, so nice. And because there's so much moulding compound here, this paint is so strong. Like, it is robust. And with this as well, if you'd prefer a slightly darker colour for your painting, you can just add some more colour. So I'm going to just show you what that sort of looks like. So, I've put in, a little bit more Prussian blue in there. Mix that through. It's actually a really cool technique that I've seen quite a few artists do, and I've started experimenting with it myself. Ooh, that's good. Is to put in, sort of place on the moulding compound first, and then put sort of your paints over the top. Okay, so that's a little bit darker. Quite happy with that. So what I'm going to do here, slightly different technique again, because I'm going to be giving you as many techniques as possible with this, is I'm just going to load this time just on the right edge of my palette knife. So I'm just going to take that there. And I've just realised I've got 30 minutes left. I feel like that half an hour just flew past. I don't know if you found that as well. So with this edge, I'm going to use the edge of my palette knife to draw a little bit more of a crisper outline here. But I'm going to also play around and distort that a little bit. So you can see that if you place it on there, see how placing that on the edge and then pulling down gives a really nice crisp edge. So here we go. Probably even do that again. Ooh, look at that. And I'm just going to hold that canvas up onto the side there. So hopefully what you can see is this lovely ridge. I'm actually going to destroy that ridge, but I'm just showing you this technique so you can know, what you can really do with your palette knife. And it all has to do with the way you press, the pressure, the direction, all this sort of stuff. All right, marvelous. So I'm just going to now use the tip of my palette knife and spread that across. There we go. Lovely. Lovely amount of blue. All right, wonderful. Let's go to our next color. Give that paint palette knife a quick wipe. Now, if you'd like a softer edge here as well, sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit. I do that sometimes. You can take your small palette knife and you can actually just, with a heavy pressure, actually sort of pull some of that off and sort of press it on. So you can actually start to really kind of drag sort of one into the other. So see how that's starting to soften now? Isn't that cool? And I'm actually deliberately breaking it and making it a little bit more organic and a little bit less kind of even. It's less even Steven. It's a little bit more on that abstract, very loose, sort of free-flowy kind of feeling. There we go. So I've sort of broken the mold there a little bit. Ta-da! All right, next color. We are using our beautiful Cobalt Turquoise. So I'll just place my palette over here. And I'm going to use this over on this side there. Oh, it's such a nice colour. I feel like I've been saying that for, I mean, the Prussian blue and the Cobalt Turquoise, you can just see, they're just yummy colours. As far as ocean landscapes go, I think they're just the bee's knees. All right, so let's place in a large amount of moulding compound in with our Cobalt Turquoise. I'll smudge that there. So again, if you have any questions or you'd like to watch this video, the whole thing from start to finish when you've got all your paints ready to roll, you can subscribe to our newsletter and you can get the tips. I've written out a lovely little step-by-step for today's class, a few little extra tips, my little personal go-to tips, so you can access those. Oh, isn't that lovely? So nice. Alrighty, got our lovely Cobalt Turquoise. Let's throw that on. So nice and well mixed in with our moulding compound. Yum, yum, yum. It kind of feels like you're icing a cake a little bit. Maybe I need to go and have lunch. There's lots of food analogies coming up. All right, now with this, I'm actually going to overlap this onto the Prussian blue section. So I'm going to be, I only kind of want just a little bit of that Prussian blue sort of sticking out across the top here. And I love this color, so I really want a lot of it to show through. So if I'm layering that color on top, I'm just going to place that on with a light pressure. Wow. Take me to summertime. Ooh. How nice. Now, if you have sort of stretched a color around and you're noticing that your palette knife is now taking that, you know, color around quite a lot, you can just wipe the edge of color that you don't like, pick up, you know, fresh color. Sorry, what I just did there is I've just placed the paint on the left side because I'm going to be pulling the paint from the left side into the other side of the picture. So light pressure, on it goes. Yummy, yummy. Now I even tick that down. Wonderful. How good is that? Lovely. Got some fantastic, really ocean feeling there. And I'm just going to push that up and really wanting to cover that on that side. All right, cool, wonderful. And you can even play around by, you know, that little twisty thing that we're doing with the clouds. You can actually twist using the nose of the palette knife, twist it in and see how this fantastic texture comes through. It's like you're digging in. Digging into your paint is also, you can also call it your scrivato method. Makes you sound very fancy when you talk about your paint. Just refers to scratching the color. All right, that's one color, done. Next color to do is going to be a lovely Naples Yellow. Okay, so for our Naples Yellow, this is like our really nice sort of sandy area. We are going to be lightening this color a little bit. It's about to leave this on there. So you can see if I open this up, it's a lovely light buttery color, isn't it? So you know how I had all this, oh actually no, I will use a nice new part of my palette. And this rag is going to save the day once more. I'm just going to push that aside a little bit. Oh. All right. So a little bit of Naples Yellow there. So nice. And I'm also going to be mixing that in with quite a lot of titanium white. Be quite generous with how much white you place on. And then I'm going to be adding in my moulding paste. Ooh, almost called a compound again. Just doesn't want to come off the bottom there. Okay, look at that gigantic amount of it. Fantastic. Smudge that there. Marvelous. Now I can take my big palette knife again. Maybe give that a wipe with a tissue this time, because my rag is looking pretty full of paint. Didn't take long. Wonderful. Now, actually, I've just realised something really cool. I'm going to show you a really fun technique we can use too. So I'm going to mix up 2 colours before putting them onto our canvas. So first off, we've got our lovely, and even if a little bit of that turquoise is getting in there, it's actually, it's not really. It's not too bad at all, because it's just little trace amounts. So you can see just how, you know, how thick, how much texture sort of comes out. Lovely. So I'm going to place that pile there and come back to it in a little second. The next colour I'm going to mix up is a very, very, very light purple. So I'm using the Brilliant Violet for this one, and a lot of titanium white. So again, if you have any questions, you're thinking, oh, you know, I really like these colours, where can I, you know, go and get them or whatnot, just ask any questions in the chat. And again, if you've just joined, big welcome. Because I know one of the lovely things about these lives, and I know a lot of you are probably on your lunch break at the moment, so you know, if you pop in for a little bit, you can you know, subscribe to the video so you can watch the whole thing again in your own time, whenever it's convenient. Okay, so I've just placed a large amount of white, a little bit of purple. Look at that, it's like a little paint sandwich. And now I'm going to add in lots of my moulding compound. Whoops, throwing things around now. Now you might be thinking purple's a strange colour to put in the sand. Or maybe you're not thinking that, but I'm going to explain to you why I'm using purple regardless, just so you know. Well, there's 2 reasons why I like to use purple in sand. The first reason is that wet sand reflects a slightly purple colour. I swear, have a look at some of your holiday photos that you've taken of the beach. Have a look for the colour. Think about what colour that wet sand is. And I am 100% confident that it's, you know, it has purple tinges to it, purple touches. The other reason why purple is such a lovely colour to have in with your sand is that purple and yellow are complementary colours, which means that they're opposite on the colour wheel, and they actually make the other appear a little bit more vibrant. So I got my 2 colours here, and I've done a doozy. I've used my my moulding compound palette knife to mix my colour again. Give that a good clean. All right, so we've got my 2 colours. I'm going to use my big palette knife here, and what I'm going to be doing here is I'm actually going to be loading 2 colours onto the same palette knife and then sort of pushing them around. So I'm going to put purple on the top edge of my palette knife and yellow down the bottom edge. So let's go. First thing we're going to do is just look at my blob of paint, look at my palette knife and make sure that's sitting about the halfway mark. There we go. Blob number 1, blob number 2. Come in about halfway there. Oh, look at that. Yum. Looks like ice cream. Alrighty, now I'm equipped, have my double paint. I can come in and place on my colour. So I'm going to be overlapping just a little bit into the turquoise here, placing that on. Wow, check that out. That's so cool. Alright, and I'm just going to be pushing that around. You can see the way that they sort of blend together. There we go. I am twisting my palette knife around. Wow, awesome. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to pick up some more of that yellow, fill in sort of the little gaps and blodges, and some more of those little twisty twirlies with my palette. Brings in some nice colours. There we go, very nice. Wonderful, and that purple there just sort of gives that little feeling of the wet sand, which is wonderful. Whoa. All right, can we believe it? 15 minutes to go now. Wowee, what a crescendo. So the last thing we're going to be doing here is we're going to be adding in some nice white highlights to this. Now I say last thing, but we might actually have time to add in some more details as well. Depends on how we go. So back to our lovely palette, which is looking very beautiful. All these lovely colours. Nice blob of white here. So I'm going to utilise the paint that I have left, and then I'm going to mix up some more as well. So I can take my little fiddly paintbrush, not my paint, palette knife, and make sure it's clean, more or less. Wow, you can see why I always have paint on my hands. Do things like that. So I'm going to scoop up this white, and what I'm going to be doing with this white is I'm just going to be building up sort of the sea foam, the nice crashing bits and pieces, and with this I'm going to keep those marks really loose. Everything's going to have a little bit of a wave, a little bit of a curl to it. So I might start up the top here and place on some nice little marks with light pressure. It's kind of lovely to see how some parts, mix in, there we go, and other parts kind of stay quite crisp. Oh, there we go, look at this rag, holy moly. So I'm just going to give that a quick wipe, because the thing is, if you don't wipe your palette knife between painting and picking up new paint, you're going to drag some of the wet colour, undesired colour, into your paint. That's going to make it muddy. So really, rags, they're your best friends when you're using, when you're building up texture like this. So clean palette knife, pick up more colour. And I might place on anything, maybe over here. This looks a little bit like it needs a bit of something down here. Let's just push that around, light pressure. Oh, lovely. Maybe I'll take a few little pieces up into my ocean. And then you don't want to overdo the white, because the white really, it's your accent, right? It's a nice little highlight. It's just connecting two parts together. Wow, with a very, very light pressure. It's almost like that colour just nicks the top little forms of your artwork. Nice. Already that feels like a nice ocean. The wet sand now, the purple of my wet sand, you might have thought, oh, that's a bit nuts putting purple in the sand, but tell you what, now it looks like it belongs there. At least I think it does. Okay, so I might just go ahead and mix up a little bit more white, because I just do want to put in some more white, maybe through here, and maybe just coming up into that ocean a little bit too. So I'll just place out some more titanium white and some more of my moulding paste, making sure that my palette knife is very clean. I feel like I'm already pretty much there, but one thing you can also do, depending on how tactile you like to be with your art, it's actually a really great thing. You can actually just get in there and finger paint too. All of these colours are non-toxic, which is awesome. So that means that if you do want to finger paint, you don't have to worry about nasty pigments getting in your bloodstream, or if you go and you eat a piece of cake after painting with your hands and you accidentally consume it, you're not going to die. Depends on how much. Really don't condone eating paint, just in case you're wondering. But it is nice to know that whatever you're using, it is non-toxic. Non-toxic, highly pigmented, archival grade, which is wonderful. Okay, there we go. Now I've got a lovely amount of white mixing through here too. One's a bar. All right, so now I'm going to come in here and just add in some little bits and pieces. There we go. So I might just add in a little bit more broken little detail-y marks over here. Wipe my palette knife, pick up more white, and let's put in, maybe we've just got a little breaker over here, another little. There we go. So if you've got any questions at all, please feel free to pop them in the chat. If you've just joined and you think, oh, this looks good, I wouldn't have minded, seeing the start of it, subscribe to our newsletter and you'll be able to get the nice little step-by-step, PDF, as well as the video recording, which makes life a lot easier. So I'm just coming ahead now and putting some more white down over here. And at this particular stage, you can really start to play around. Like, let's say you want to, really amplify certain areas, and you think, yeah, I really wouldn't mind putting on like, a stack of texture here. That's where you can use very, very light pressure, lots of paint on your palette knife, and just sort of place on a few little bits and pieces. Now, I realise there is one last colour that we do have time to put on. Remember I was mentioning our lovely Napthol Crimson, which we have not used yet. What I'm going to do now is put a speck, like a teeny tiny touch. Now this is an optional colour as well, we don't have to add it in, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a very, very light version of it with the white that I already have. So I'm just going to put a touch, right, a real tiny touch. Using my palette knife, I'm going to mix in, wow, you can just see how pigmented those colours are, right? That's a touch, and that is still very, very light. So I'm just going to take it over here and lighten it further. We want to make a very, very, very light pink. Wonderful. Now when you have an incredibly lovely pastel-y pink, we are ready to put a little bit of interest in our sand. So very, very light pressure, I'm just going to place in very, very light sort of, and I'm moving my hand a lot, there's lots of back and forward here. If you like, quite a lot of texture with your work, you want shorter marks, you can actually tap your palette knife on your surface, sort of tapping. Oh, for that, as I tap, check that out. I'm just going to bring that, probably maybe not the most ideal texture for the sand, so I will probably go over it, but just gives you an idea of how, with the moulding paste, it holds its texture, which is so wonderful. There we go, I'll probably just smooth out a few bits and pieces there. Oh, this just takes me to summertime. I know, where winter's in the past now in Australia, but gosh, I just want to go to the beach. There we go. So I'll just sort of, you can play around, you can kind of work. One thing to be cautious of when you're doing this is not to overwork it as well. You don't want to sort of overdo it. So, okay, looking here, what else do you think I could probably do? I think actually, maybe I'm going to add in maybe a little bit more of that sky colour up here. I think that's probably one thing I'm going to do. Just want to actually have the blend of my sky into my ocean a little bit more sort of fluid there. So I might just take just a little speck of my ultramarine, and you can see now that I'm getting to the final stages of this, I'm starting to fiddle a little bit. And I'd say if you're really wanting to fiddle, this is the time to do it, right at the end. So I'm just going to take a little touch of that ultramarine blue into my white. There we go. You might notice I'm also doing all of these final little bits in the tiny palette knife. There we go. What am I going to do here? Starting here, just going to drag that in. Awesome, that's what I'm talking about. I actually want to have that as a really soft little blend going on there. So the trick to get this really soft blend is actually just to go over the top with a light pressure, long marks. Oh, look at that. Looks like the sky is just disappearing, or the ocean is disappearing into the sky. Not that the sky's disappearing, that would be very strange. Now, one thing I'll mention as well is that if you think to yourself, this is really lovely, but there's all these different colours and, every single one of them ends up really being really pastel-y. With the Atelier Interactives, we actually have them as a set of pastels, which is super cool. And if you love abstract painting, it is just the bee's knees having a set like that to work from. So I'm just going to finish off that little part there. Marvelous. You can see that Prussian blue, it's important, it peeks out there, but it's really quite subtle. Okay, I'm even just going to take a little bit of dirty marks into my clouds. So I'm deliberately dirtying up those clouds. I'm deliberately putting a little bit of that ocean colour up in there. It just sort of helps. Well, it creates a little bit of colour harmony there. There's a little bit up there too. There we go. All right. I might just take some nice long strokes across that horizon line to give that sense that it's sort of blending out. Cool. So it's amazing the variety of different textures and effects that you can get with your moulding compound and your acrylics. So now I'm fiddling quite a lot. I'm putting that little Prussian blue up there, re-establishing a bit more darkness in that area. So at this stage, let's say that you're painting along and you think, oh, bugger, I've really, covered an area that I like, or, there's a particular colour that you want to show through a little bit more. This would be the time that you can just place it on over the top with a light pressure. Using my palette knife at a vertical direction at the moment. It's quite important. I'm actually dragging that to get that long line. As I said, the more the fiddle, the more realistic it's getting. So I'm going to call it a day. So look, this is our lovely textured oceanscape. As you can see, it has a little bit more definition across the horizon line than the fellow behind me here. But with paintings, they're always going to take on slightly different personality as well. So what I was talking about with the pastel set, let me show you. Look at this. Isn't it beautiful? I feel like I'm just going to be getting paint all over it. So here, if you're wanting to do a similar artwork and you really want to, not have to worry about the color mixing or whatnot, you can come in and use these lovely pastel sets. So these pastel sets, all the difficult color mixing, the soft colors done for you. So you could follow the exact same steps, but what you would do is where you have the Cobalt Turquoise, use the Pastel Ultramarine, and where you have the Prussian blue, you'd probably use the Arctic blue, and you'd use a nice pastel mist for the sky. So you've got a lovely little set there. And I think when you're abstract painting as well, I know that this is a very landscape-inspired abstract painting. Let's say you're doing pure abstraction, right? It is so helpful to be able to have a colour scheme, because your colour scheme is the string that ties your artwork together. And, make sure that it's going to, fit the space and everything else. So before we tie up for the day, does anybody have any questions about anything at all to do with what I've covered today, to do with maybe even some of the materials that we've been using as well? Because I'd love to be able to, you pick my brain while I'm here, and that's sort of one of the best things to go through. Alrighty, well, in that case, sorry, there was a bit of a pause there because I was just checking the chats, just making sure. I thought, oh, you know what, I'll give it one last go. We'll see what's there. So look, I want to give you all, like I said, thank you so much for joining today's session. It was so much fun to go through this particular style, this abstract work. It is, it's a lot of fun being able to really get quite creative with how you build up your work. So thank you all so much for joining, and we will be back again in a fortnight, and I'm going to actually be going through how to glaze. So glazing, it's a little bit of a tricky, well, not tricky, it's tricky until you know how to do it kind of technique. It's really great for realism. So if you're interested in creating, very realistic work, and you want to have your artwork feeling like one of the great, classic sort of works, then glazing is great. So, join back in for the next, in a fortnight, same time, same day, we'll be going through glazing. So with that all said and done, big thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your day, a great weekend. And if you want to see the whole video today, do sort of subscribe to our newsletter so we can send that through. Alrighty, au revoir, goodbye, and take care. Until next time.